Welcome everybody to my session called Shadow Cities and the Future of Location-Based Gaming. I'll start by showing some video and then get into the topic.
Hundreds of years ago, an ancient, now long forgotten force pulsed through our world. This alternative reality has now returned, using technology as the gateway. It will challenge you. It will disrupt your concept of what is real and what is not. Join us. Forge alliances. Secure your territory and fight back. Our battleground is where we live, our streets, our cities. Choose a side. Defend your area, gain control of your city, and expand your influence across continents. Shadow Cities. It's a game.
It's real.
So this is Shadow Cities, our game. Let me look for this pointer and make some magic. My name is Markus Montola. I work at Grey Area, a Finnish startup creating location-based games. I'm here to tell you about our location-based game called Shadow Cities that was launched globally a year ago, telling some of the lessons and something about our vision about the future of location-based gaming. I work as a game designer, especially a lot about what's location-based in Shadow Cities. I've been working on location-based gaming projects since 2004 at universities, at Nokia, and now with a commercial product at Grey Area. Earlier, I was here talking about our game called Pervasive Games Theory and Design that we did on the academic background that covers some basics and principles of this kind of gaming. We're talking about that in 2009. Today, however, I'm taking the academic lessons on the practical level and talking about the game we're actually doing and promoting here. Not everyone has heard about Shadow Cities, so a couple of words. A big part of why I'm here talking to you today is that we won an Online Innovation Award in GDC Online last year. We've also been nominated for a couple of awards, such as the Nordic Best Handheld Game, and most recently we won an Audience Award for the Best Mobile MMO on iOS. Or as the New York Times said, I have played the future of mobile gaming. It's called Shadow Cities. Shadow Cities isn't just the future of mobile gaming. It may actually be the most interesting, innovative, provocative, and far-reaching video game in the world right now on any system, in words of Seth Sheasel in their Culture front page. Hype aside, I'm going to show you a little bit about the game and then talk about what it's about and where we're going. So if I can get the game itself on the screen. This is Shadow Cities. When you log in for the first time, you realize that this is where I am really. So when you look at the map, you can see that we're directly here in the Moscow center. I can look around in the map. I can see some things players have created here. For instance, here is a beacon created by a guy called Scatterbrain, which I can use to navigate the place. Or we can see some spirits, NPC monsters that we can attack if we want to. And other players, Scatterbrain is moving here, apparently. Some enemy players, I'm playing on the orange side as an architect, and here we can see an animator. I can move around in the world a little bit if we want to. Jump around, or I can cast spells at the enemies. As you can see, the whole UI is pretty abstract, a little bit sparse. But we want to create a game where the feeling is all about you being the mage. That's why I use runes and magic symbols to cast spells because we didn't want to create a game where you push buttons to cast stuff. We want to create a game where you are the mage, where you can yourself feel that you're in the virtual world. Usually when I'm demoing this live, someone's sooner or later attacking me, and Bitey Bat is now doing the task for me, so apparently I died. It happens every time. Thank you, Bitey Bat. All right, let's get back to the business. So as you saw, Shadow Cities is a very PvP-oriented game. We have two sides fighting, the architects and the animators. It's all about conquering your city. Two factions are struggling. Who controls which neighborhood? When I come to Moscow Center, I can build dominators and I can collect energy from the magical ambience of the area, and the side that gathers more points every week wins. It's a kind of an eternal struggle that never ends or produces kind of permanent result, but that keeps the players occupied pretty well. Also, we supplement that with a lot of missions and quests and that kind of stuff. We started originally as a 3-person startup. And of course, a lot of the design we are showing today is motivated by the fact that our original business plan was selling one guy's car and then living off it until the things turned better. And indeed they did, because now we are 17 people in Helsinki, and we're out in 38 countries and so forth. The entire game is built at the moment on the philosophy of, wouldn't it be cool if we did this or that? And wouldn't it be cool if I could control my city? Wouldn't it be cool if I was a mage in my city? Wouldn't it be cool if I could see the other guy right there and attack him over all these street blocks and everything? I think our players agree it's pretty cool. So Shadow Cities is a location-based MMORPG. The basic game mechanics are about casting spells, killing enemies, gathering XP, completing missions, fighting other players, so forth. But what makes it special is that everything is done on a map. In essence, the planet is our playground. We try to do this planet being playground on 2 levels. When you log in, you can see the micro level. You can see your own city block. You can see the Moscow Center. But of course, the battle is about the world. You're trying to conquer the world. You're stealing energy from the world and trying to win our weekly campaigns. So here on the map, you can see that different sides have taken different parts of Europe over, and they are struggling. So whenever you play the game, you can be a part of the big struggle. You can be one of the French architects or French animators, and you can be one of the people who are really carrying this battle to our sense. We believe that this is the most exciting game board you can have. Everything that mankind has built is on our map, basically. So there are a lot of activities players are organizing for themselves that are based on the fact that we have this infinite resource on our use. It is very powerful when you log in for the first time. You get a very tangible and visceral feeling of here and now. When you see that you're in your hometown, you can see your own home there on the map. You can see your neighbors a couple of blocks away. You can see that they are playing right now. You can start battling, shooting spells back and forth. You can talk to them in comms. It creates a very powerful first minute of absolute wow that we try to create and then cultivate over a longer player lifetime. Our philosophy is to make games that are much more than check-ins. Most location-based games are very much check-in based, or they are mini-game based, while we're trying to make a real-time gameplay going on in the game in the fashion of real MMOs like, I don't know, World of Warcraft or whatever. As a resource, I mentioned already, people love this Emergent Exploration. We don't need to put stuff on the map in order for them to find it. For instance, here the players are in the Forbidden City in Beijing, or they organize these treasure hunts. Here they are in Arc of Triumph in Paris, or Pearl Harbor, or Area 51. Players go into these places, they organize their own competitions, they organize scavenger hunts and whatever. They write fanfic based on what we do. They write fanfic about gathering in Area 51 and going there and doing stuff. The powerful resource we have here is that we have a coherent world. Everything in the game is supporting the same fiction, because this is not a game. It is your magic device where you draw runes and you cast spells. So everything you have in the real world you can appropriate into the game. If you have a cool piece of local folklore, you can enter it into the fiction. If you have a mage meetup cruise, you can make that a game event. We believe that games like Shadow Cities can create a very powerful feeling of secret world. Until you see the game and open it up, you're completely unaware that the Moscone Center has been an area for fighting for this weekend. But once you try it out, you can see that there's stuff going on you didn't know about. People are actually fighting over some things you don't see, and when you go outside, you can actually envision yourself seeing the beacon coming out from behind the buildings or whatever in a very tangible way. So our vision is not to create just a game, but a kind of a global game layer that could extend to other media as well. When players put Shadow Cities in their pocket and walk on the streets, it follows them wherever they go. So even when you don't actively play the game, you're still, in some sense, a part of the game. If you left a beacon or a dominator or whatever in the world, other players can find it, other players can attack it. You could get a push notification that people are right there needing your help, or you could get a push notification that your things are going to be attacked, or so forth. Of course, we also leverage the appointment gameplay, so when you take over the Moscone Center, you start gathering energy points and you want to go there to see that they are still there. We're trying to make this in a way that is kind of real for the players. Instead of creating artificial structures, we're trying to leverage the fact that we have a living world, living coherent world with a lot of stuff in there in order to motivate players to come back and check back in whenever they are taking a walk or walking their dog. So when you're doing groceries, you're in Shadow Cities, or where you're listening a lecture, you're in Shadow Cities, because you can be a mage in this game. This is one of the fan fiction things we've gotten. We got a My Little Pony with architect symbols all over it. So let's look at what we have learned creating Shadow Cities. It's been quite a ride. We haven't taken the easiest possible route. In fact, we have been creating a game that is very much unlike anything before. So there have been a couple of rocks on the road, and we want to tell about them to you so you can avoid them when you're doing your game. This is my first very important point. When you think about location-based game, you think about players like the character in the picture, active young people who are urban explorers or whatever, moving around in their city, biking or hiking or something. But what really happens is that players play on their sofa. The location that is most central to our game is your home. This is my first key takeaway. If you take nothing away from this lecture except for this one, then take this one. So here we can see the Pac-Man of where our players play. Home and work and home alone are 74% of our gameplay, while people who play on the move or somewhere else are about 26%. We were quite surprised to learn this when we launched the game, of course, because we, like everyone else, we were thinking in terms of this image that people would be moving. But the truth is that when you create a good game, people want to play it several hours a day. And when you ask yourself, how many hours are you in a bus or in other mass transit where you can play every day, that's going to be maximum of like 1 hour or less. So most people spend most of their online time at home or at work. And even those players who mostly play in the transit also play in their home. Players sometimes do move in order to play. They take out the dogs in order to attack the enemy. They drive around Helsinki and they stop in weird places to find if there's anything to discover. But for the 99% of the playtime, it's going to be on the sofa. Everything that, and a lot of things that I'm going to talk about today have to do with this fact. First of the obvious consequences of playing on your sofa is that you play with your neighbors a lot. You live in somewhere, you live next to the Moscow Center or whatever. You see the same faces every now and then. You see the people who are on your side. They are your instant friends. They are the people who protect your assets while you're away. They are the people who you chat with quite a bit. They are the people who collect the points for the same team as you. But you also see the enemies in the same area. You see the nasty animator who is always taking down your stuff. Pretty quickly there's going to be a kind of structure of vengeance and rivalry, neighborhood rivalry, where you're attacking each other just because you know that he's going to do the same to you when he's getting on the line. In some point, you might forge an alliance, some kind of a truce that because we live in the same block, let's not fight each other. The problem, of course, is that the real world is not fair. Since we only have this one huge level, we can't really design it in the way we might want to. For instance, if in your neighborhood there's a level 18 bully who keeps on griefing you whenever you get online, that's going to be a problem for you, of course. Of course, we can do stuff like protecting newbies and that kind of things. But in fact, the real world is not fair in so many ways that you can never turn it into an entirely fair experience. For instance, if you have any resources in the game world, if you have herbs or if you have oil or whatever, some people are going to live next to the resources while other people are going to live far from them. And there is no way you can balance your resources in the world so that they would be fair to everyone. One thing we were thinking, putting some stuff in downtown while leaving suburbs in countryside empty, in order to create a kind of friction between the countryside players and the downtown players. But then we ended up in a situation where people, of course, travel from countryside to city to work and back again. So the patterns people have in using the real world are so different that it's absolutely impossible to make the real world entirely fair. Of course, you can take your resources and put them everywhere in the world. So you can have oil and herbs everywhere. But then you again lose some of your location-based flavor of the game. It's a very difficult balance to strike, entirely possible, but something you want to think on when you're planning your game. Also, you don't have lobby areas and so forth. In Shadow Cities, we ended up having very few resources in the game world, but then again, it being a PvP game, having other players near you is also a resource because then you can fight them. And again, the game is not fair. That is my key takeaway number 2. Here in the image, you can see the map of southern Finland. It's about roughly the size of Arizona in terms of area and population. In south, you can see the big cities, Helsinki especially in the middle, and also in the southwest, you can see some other bigger cities. This map indicates the level of player activity in different areas in the country. The problem is, of course, you want to keep the countryside populated, but you don't want to clutter the big cities. You're going to have a lot of players in urban areas like Manhattan, so they must be playable for your game. But then you're going to have trouble in Montana because there is no one around, there are no resources around, and you have to figure this out somehow. This is a very critical question. We knew that the critical mass would be some kind of an issue. But when you start delving deeper into it, you have to realize that you have to have, in a multiplayer game, you have to have the critical mass in every neighborhood at all times. Especially because Shadow Cities is very much about PvP and collaboration. The experience suffers a lot if you're alone in somewhere. So basically, it's a very hard balance. When we wrote the book I mentioned, Pervasive Games, we wrote about critical mass for 2 pages. If I wrote the same book today, I would write about it for 12 pages or something. This is probably the biggest challenge in the way of map-based games like Shadow Cities. Eventually, I believe you have to choose to cater to downtown, to suburbs, or to countryside, and find some fixes for the way to make the game work in other areas. but it's not going to be easy anyway. This is a very important takeaway. One way we can solve this problem is virtual movement. So in Shadow Cities, as I showed you, you can move on the map even though you don't walk around in the real meat space. That can solve a lot of your problems. You can create newbie areas. You can solve the critical mass issue. It always also will shift your balance from playing with neighbors to playing with your real-world friends. If you want to have a game where my Facebook friends are more important than my friends in Shadow Cities, this might be a thing to do, because then if you live in Manhattan, I can maybe travel to Manhattan and play with you. But of course, this is also a trade-off. If you're creating a location-based game and if you're serious about it, you might want to think about how much of your location-based appeal you will lose by going this way. Probably the right thing to do is some kind of a balance. Shadow Cities has one example of the balance, and we've been tweaking it while the game has been running. But I'm really much looking forward to finding out what kind of solutions are found in future. In Shadow Cities, the primary way for players to move is the beacons. I can place a beacon in Moscow Center, and all my friends can then immediately warp to Moscow Center. We have a lot of good player activity when there is a fight going on in somewhere like Central Park, New York, and people start putting out beacons and screaming to their friends that, please come help me, because these guys are running us over. And that creates a lot of good, big battles, bringing people together in urban areas. Another solution we have used is that we encourage dormant gameplay. With dormant gameplay, I mean that the game is dormant. You're not actively playing, but there's still things happening that can influence your assets. And the game can also alarm you from the dormancy with a push notification or some other message and invite you to play again. That is a good method, because even if you don't have the temporal aspect of the critical mass in order, you can have other players leaving their marks in the world, and when the players are finding each other's marks, they start alarming and inviting each other over to the game, and that works pretty well for us. On the other hand, our mechanics encourage ambient gameplay. With ambient gameplay, I mean gameplay where I'm working and I have my cell phone on and I'm monitoring what's happening around, say, Moscow Center. I'm watching over my assets and I'm chatting with my friends and I'm working, I'm whatever, sitting in Facebook or something. We actually have sessions that are upwards of 60 minutes long. People just getting online, sitting on their dominators, sitting on their gateways, looking at their neighborhoods and chatting and fighting every now and then. It's a very hardcore group that does that, but then again, we are aiming at our game to the gamer audience anyway. It is often thought that real-time gaming requires long play sessions, but for Shadow Cities, this is clearly not true. If I log in just for a couple of minutes like I did a moment ago, there will be someone quite often I can fight with, or I can harvest my stuff, or I can plant some stuff for harvesting in future. And there's a good chance of real-time gameplay coming in, meeting me. Especially when the game gives me a push notification that my stuff is under attack, I just check into the push notification and I'm in the fight right away, in the middle of it. In this image, we are in Beirut. And Beirut is here to illustrate the challenges of location data. For instance, in here, our map data was all encoded in Arabic. There are a lot of this kind of surprises that you will encounter once you're starting to roll your game out in different countries. Some places are not in the map databases at all. Our central unit of map data is neighborhood, and neighborhood means very different things in different places. We've been looking also a lot into stuff like venue data from Gowalla and Foursquare. But that data is also quite problematic. For instance, we were looking at military installations, and we found a load of historical sites. And if I find a historical castle when I'm trying to find an ammo depot, for me as a player, it creates a bad sense of discontinuity between the game and the real world. we want to create a feeling where the player knows that there's a military installation here, and so when I go there, there might be something related to military installations. But when you use map data, you might very likely end up in tinkering with the data yourself. And that's, of course, a lot of work, because the only level you can have, which is the planet, is really, really big level. Of course, you can let your players edit your database, but you should then remember that players who are playing on their sofa will want to optimize their own neighborhood. So they want to put their military installation and hospital and whatever you give resources for. So it's not going to be easy that way either. This is, again, a key takeaway that you want to take on the production side, definitely. Speaking of maps, this is what maps look like. And when you look at the location-based games that use maps, you can frequently see that they don't look very game-like. They don't look very playful. They don't look very fun. And that is, of course, because our mission with the maps is actually the opposite when we compare it with the mission of the people who are actually making the maps. They want to make clear, concise visualizations of environment. They want them to be zoomable and pannable and so forth. They want them to be neutral, unoffending, serious, clean, clear. While, for instance, when you look at the Shadow Cities map that is blue and black and creates a fictional world, we're somewhere closer to what people want to do in level design in console games. We want it to be mysterious and secretive and shady and intriguing. In my opinion, when you see people putting game-like frames or game-like icons on top of the Google Maps or Bing Maps or whatever, it very rarely works nicely because of this inherent contradiction. Also, the map data is full of details you don't want to maybe tell your players. For instance, here we can see Marriott Hotel and Moscone Center and so forth. And it might be that if your game is about mages, you don't want your mages to focus on hotels and tourist attractions. You might want to have, dark alleys and whatever on your map. Technologically, of course, iPhone was a great news for our company. Actually, we wouldn't exist without iPhone. But still, the tech that we are using in the games, it's not exactly designed for location-based gaming, and it's also not necessarily very optimal for it. For instance, if you take positioning is not very accurate, and it takes a lot of battery. Of course, most of the time when utility apps position you, they just want your location once. Or if you have a running app, then maybe like once a minute or something. But if you're biking away from the architects, should we update your location all the time? The problem is that positioning takes time. It's not very fast. It devours battery power, especially on iPhone 3GS. Playing Shadow Cities is quite a challenge because you have to be hooked into the charger pretty much, and so forth. And the challenge here is that when you're in an environment like App Store, you're going to get reviews from all your players, not only the players who you optimize for. So if you have issues with battery life and you have your game open for 3GS, you're going to have lots of people there giving you low ratings because they're not satisfied with the battery performance. The same applies to positioning accuracy, of course. The positioning on iPhone is mostly reliable, but when it's not, and it often is not, then you start getting complaints from players as if you could do something about it, which of course you can't. We also need a lot of network traffic. And the thing about mobile lag is that it's very spiky. The network lag can spike unpredictably above 3 to 5 seconds. If we get a 10-second lag spike, it's not a rare occasion. It's particularly difficult because it's very, very hard to predict. If you have an iPhone, of course, just holding it the wrong way might spike your lag, and your players will be wondering what's happening. Your player might be going inside an elevator or car and still not realize that it's he who is creating the lag, not your system or even the phone. And of course, when you're running a multiplayer game, you don't know, or your designers can't predict who is going to be on GPRS, who is going to be on Wi-Fi, who is going to be on Edge or 3G. And in multiplayer battles, of course, the people in Wi-Fi have an edge, so to say. The way we manage these problems is that we try to manage the player's expectations from the start. For instance, if we pinpointed the player's location on the map very exactly, we'd get even more complaints about the problems of positioning. Instead, in Shadow Cities, we hover the players gently above the map so that the players are somewhat unable to say where there's going to be problems. With lag spikes, we of course cover lag spikes in casting animations. Most of our spells can be only, they take like 2 or 3 seconds to cast, so our battles are a couple of spells back and forth instead of what we might otherwise do, dozens of spells back and forth. If you create quick interactions and quick animations, you're going to be in trouble. In some point, we were thinking about a game idea with swords and attacks and ninjas and stuff hitting back and forth. But in a ninja animation, it's going to be super difficult to hide the fact that you're hitting someone with a sword and then the lag is 5 seconds. The thematic limitations in this field are going to be a challenge. They are not a huge challenge yet because everything is not yet done, but they will be a huge challenge in 5 years. If you want to create a game like Shadow Cities where the integration of real world and game world is as thorough as we are aiming for, you have very few themes that you can viably exploit. You have vampires, mafia, paranormal, aliens, police, and so forth. But there's going to be the day when all this real-world fiction is so strongly tapped out that it's going to be pretty hard to come up with new fiction. And I think for vampires, we are seeing that already in the culture in general, that people have seen so many vampires that they don't want to see any more vampires. And I wouldn't be surprised if mafia or crime or that kind of stuff would be going pretty fast after it. This is a real challenge because the experience of Shadow Cities is that the cohesive world and the total theme that is overarching is very powerful in terms of player creation, in terms of fan fiction, in terms of player-created activities. It is very valuable for us that the mythology of Shadow Cities, even though it's very sparse, it's consistent and players have easy time adding to it. So you might want to plunder it before it's all gone. The important thing about many of these challenges is that some of them are unsolvable. This is something game designers rarely say, but I feel that we need to understand it in terms of design. If we take an example from the MMORPG or mod scene, they had a couple of problems that they discovered were unsolvable, but it took them years and years to discover it. Permadeath is probably the most famous example. They tried to make permadeath in lots of multi-user dungeons. They tried to make it in different kinds of permadeath in many MMORPGs. Even Star Wars Galaxies had a permadeath in the beginning for Jedi characters. They discovered that as long as you have unreliable network connections, people are going to lose connection and they are going to die. And that is not fun if you have permadeath. Or if you allow people to unplug their computers when they are about to die, then they will do so to avoid permadeath all the time. So permadeath turned out to be an unsolvable problem. The way they deal with the permadeath now is, of course, that when you die in World of Warcraft, you spawn a minute later next to where you died. This was kind of an unthinkable and unintuitive solution when first mods came out, because if you have a world and someone dies in the world, then they have to stay dead, otherwise there is no point. I'm wondering what are the unsolvable problems of the map-based games and location-based games. We don't know it yet because we're going to try different approaches a couple of times. We're trying to find our ways around them. We're looking for the solutions. And I'm looking forward to see which of these problems can be solved. For instance, Is the critical mass an unsolvable problem, or do we find a clever way around it? In MMORPG scene, one of the issues with critical mass they used to avoid cluttering was instancing. Maybe we should try instancing as well. Of course, over time, we're coming up with unintuitive solutions that become the staple of the industry, like spawning next to your dead body. My favorite example is Farmville gifts. The presents you give to other players that you can't get yourself, that you don't lose when you give them out, that seem nowadays quite intuitive to the players, even though they wouldn't make any sense in any other context. This is my fifth key takeaway. When you're trying to solve these problems, you should think about whether they are unsolvable, and you should just go around them. As a company, what we're going to do is go into the future step by step. With Shadow Cities, we absolutely innovated. We tried to create 80% new things and stick to 20% old things. But in future, I believe that now that we've established and we learned from Shadow Cities, we're going to try to stick 80% to what we know and just innovate for the 20%. Instead of jumping into unknown, the business model should be careful exploration of what works and how to innovate on top of that. Of course, the games like these must be extremely simple. Shadow Cities is quite complicated, actually, because the players still have a hard time in understanding how to play location-based games in the first place. Even though our game is fairly abstract, we get these player creations. One of our players is creating plush toys out of the spirits and sent us some. So the challenges we have chosen to address, they are far from easy, but we believe that there is a future in location-based games, and we want to be one of the first companies that go there and figure out what is this new thing. We're building our playbook and trying to learn from the lessons of Shadow Cities, from the ups and downs, and kind of loading our gun for the next big shot. We believe that in location-based gaming, the sweet spot in terms of business is right now. There is not yet a category leader like Zynga or Blizzard, but the tech is sufficiently advanced, and the business models, monetization, and viral models are sufficiently advanced that we can create a viable product. And indeed, Shadow Cities came out a year ago, and after Shadow Cities, there have been at least the following games: Stinktopia, Go War, Zombiehood, Life is Crime, Please Stay Calm, and Code Runner coming out in the last year. I think there are a couple more, but these are just some examples. And as you can see when I talked about the themes here, Please Stay Calm and Zombiehood are about zombies. Life is Crime is about crime, obviously. Code Runner is a little bit different. It's about agents. Go War is quite different. It's about tanks even. And Stinktopia, well, you have a factory in the clouds where you build smelly chemical compounds and then you throw stink bombs on your friends. So they have a novel theme, at least. Also, in these images, I think you can see the difficulty of turning the Google map into a game-like thingy. So we have the huge challenge of educating the players, teaching them what are location-based games, how do you play them, why are they fun. But then again, we get to define the genre ourselves. When you look at Shadow Cities and fire it up and play it with it, for 2 minutes, you can see that our vision distance on the map, it's about 500 meters. When we chose that 500 meters, it was a fairly arbitrary decision. We wanted it to be something where you can see a little bit around you, but not too much around you. But after you give Shadow Cities to someone who hasn't been there in the process of thinking that 500 meters, it feels pretty obvious that this is the right distance. I'm not sure if it's at all obvious, but by doing this kind of decisions and hopefully inspiring other people making location-based games, they will follow in some of these decisions, and we can see kind of the watermark we have left on the scene. We're actually happy to see the competition. We don't think that the other 6 games and so forth are really competing for the same players that we are trying to grab, because the truth is that there is no such thing as a location-based player base as a huge entity. I think most of the location-based players play either Shadow Cities or Life is Crime or one of the couple of previous games. So we're actually trying to create customers, not fighting over them. The future, of course, hopefully, is going to be not only location-based, but also context-based. Your physical, your social, your temporal, and cultural context can all be leveraged for gameplay. We like to say that our rain effect in Shadow Cities is the best in the game market, because if it rains in Shadow Cities, you really get wet, unlike in any other game. We're keen on finding out what other kind of context can be included in this kind of gaming, whether it comes from Goala and Foursquare or elsewhere. But then again, we have to think about whether the map-based gaming is the future of location-based. If you remove the map and you just stick to the locations, you will lose a couple of things. Great things, we love some of these things. You will lose the feeling of here and now. You will lose the feeling of wow when you see your own home in the game. You will lose the feeling of seeing that the other guy is there and now I'm busting his ass. But on the other hand, you can also solve a couple of problems with that. For instance, regarding the critical mass issue, you can pretty much hide the fact whether there is a critical mass or not, because you're not strictly binding yourself into this precise and exact visualization of the game world we are using. You can just say that there are 10 players around you and not care whether they are 10 meters around you or within the radius of 100 kilometers. You will lose the map scaling issues and positioning issues. You can save a lot of battery power. So we're also keeping our eyes open for that. Location has many other meanings than just the map. Reaching towards the conclusion of my presentation, I want to tell a story, just an example of an experience that we have made possible, something that was utterly impossible in any game before Shadow Cities. As you know, every year there is a memorial for the victims of the 9/11 strikes in New York. They erect these two pillars of light near the location of where the Twin Towers once were. Our players in Shadow Cities wanted to observe this memorial, so this is what they did. They went into the Manhattan in the game world. They invited their friends all over the world, and they created the beacons from the beacons of Shadow Cities in order to replicate the same memorial in the virtual world. And this is, again, one example of the emergent content you get for free where you're using the planet as your playground. Don Norman said, we grow to love the objects that connect us to other people, create meaning, and remind us that we are alive. At Grey Area, we believe in this quite strongly. We believe that they come for the game, but they stay for the community. And we believe that we can use the real world to create a lot of meanings, a lot of social content, a lot of anchoring points for players who can then stay for the community and enjoy the global game layer we are providing them. Even though they come for the game, they stay for the community, it's a truism for all MMORPG field. We believe that we can create a community that is quite different from the others, because our community is based on location, based on neighbors, based on where you live, and based on how you move around in the real world. So this is our vision. Your city is a game. All cities are different. What kind of game would your city be? Shadow Cities is our first tab at mastering the art of location-based gaming and map-based gaming. But we believe that we can surpass it with our next title that's coming out later this year quite well. Even though we have uncovered a lot of hazards and troubles on the way to where we are at now, at 17 people, We are pretty proud that we've accomplished what we've accomplished, and we're pretty proud that we created the first location-based MMORPG, at least as far as we know. We have not chosen an easy path, and we've found many challenges, but we also believe that there is a very good market that can be uncovered by capturing this new field. Thank you. So if you have questions or comments, please use the microphones.
Hi, congratulations for the presentation, very interesting. Yeah, I have a lot of questions actually, but I'll go just for a few of them, then maybe I'll come later. So one is a bit technical. So how did you solve the problems with the map in the end?
How did we solve the problems with the map?
Yeah, like in terms of design and look and, removing some buildings that you don't want in the map, etc.
Right. Personally, I'm a game designer, and my background is in humanities. So I might not be the right person to answer that question, unfortunately. But our CTO, Mikko, is here, so you can probably ask him after the presentation, so he'll be...
Okay, so that's one of the questions I'll keep for later.
I think we have another there, but...
Okay, yeah. So, as a game designer using the real world as your level, as your map, how did you, and using this kind of large connected experience, how did you go about testing and iterating on your concepts?
We test and iterate a lot, and we do it like, I guess it's some kind of a social gaming tradition nowadays. We iterate on the fly pretty much. So every week in Shadow Cities there's a campaign that has a couple of rule changes, especially during the beta and after the global launch. We were putting out these week-long campaigns a lot. And we're constantly looking at our metrics and see what works, see what doesn't. It's kind of mandatory, actually, because the world is huge and we have a lot of players, and it's a very complex game in terms of interactions and emergent behaviors. So the only way to really test this kind of thing is to kind of put it out there and see what happens and then tweak it on the run.
Can you say anything about the user testing you did before launch?
Come again?
Can you say anything about the user testing you did before you launched in the game? Did you do any of that?
We had friends. We had an alpha for friends and family, but in all cases like this one, when you engage your real player base, then you're going to hit the wall pretty hard. So we had to do a couple of big changes in the beta. So we first opened the game in Finland only, and we were looking very closely at what players did and how they worked, and we were doing radical changes in the game at that time.
Thank you.
Yeah, you'd mentioned that some of your users have been doing stuff like integrating folklore or local history into the game. I was wondering if you could explain some of the ways in which that's happening and whether or not you've modified any of the mechanics of the game or introduced any new mechanics to sort of foster that or accommodate it.
What makes it possible in Shadow Cities is that we are very sparse in terms of visual and textual information. Okay. So we don't tell much about the world. We just say you are the mage, and we show you the world, and then you get very short mission descriptions. All our spirits are entities from the real-world mythology, so we have Valkyries and whatever you can fight. But because the game is also very abstract, it's a kind of a black hole that you can fill with whatever you want to. So that is basically the thing. But most of the fan fiction stuff and that kind of thing happens in our forums.
So it's sort of just like accessory to, it's not yet been integrated into...
That is correct.
Okay. Cool, thanks.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I'll go with the second question. This is more commercial. So can you disclose anything about the revenues of the game, or in general, if you did some market analysis, what the potential is for these kind of games?
We haven't released any player figures, but then again, that wouldn't be the right way of looking at Shadow Cities either. We are not aiming at the casual or hyper-casual market here. Instead, we believe that gamers who really get into the game monetize better. And that is actually true for our game. Our lifetime value of players is pretty high. So that is what we go for.
Okay, thanks.
Hi. You mentioned you're the first LBG. In fact, the military and various homeland defense organizations have been using similar things to this for some years. They are even now blending or mixing so-called LVC training, live, virtual, and constructive, where you can be in different worlds at the same time. It's very expensive, of course, to model a city in 3D. Movies are doing it. I know several companies quite well that are 3D mapping for their movies and their different franchises. The military and others are mapping. Have you considered partnering or working with some of these people that have 3D maps?
So the question was whether we have considered partnering with people who are using 3D maps of cities. I guess the big challenge there is that the world is huge and we have players everywhere. So if we wanted to, I mean, that kind of design approach would force us to focus on big cities like New York and San Francisco. I'm not sure if the player base exists as large enough in those cities. But I got to say, it would be the coolest experience I could imagine in this kind of game, probably.
Hi, Aurelius. I'm Bitey Bat. Thank you for letting me crash your presentation. I had a question about the core game loop of Shadow Cities. It's a very transitory, transient experience, really quick gameplay, and I wondered if there was any thought in the design process to extending that to a greater permanence of the augmented reality that you're creating in the game, creating structures that have a longer lifespan in-game versus kind of the quick core loop of the game currently.
The question was about the session length in our game. We believe that the most important thing is to make the 2-minute sessions possible. So that is the real thing, and everything else is a bonus. So I think in the foreseeable future we'll stick to fairly short sessions, but I'm not sure about that. Also, our players are having those mammoth sessions of 60 minutes or longer because they are just watching over some neighborhood. So I think we already have that. I'm not sure if we should support that anymore, any deeper. I mean.
And kind of on a related note, what was the driving force behind the decision, at least in the States, to change the battle group size from individual state by state to entire regions of the country?
The question was about our battle group sizes, so that's nitty-gritty in the game mechanics. It was that since we have 2 sides battling, we want each player to have a bigger feeling of impact in the struggle. So if you're one of the 1,000, you're feeling less important than if you're one of the 100.
And I guess that was my question. Is I think there was a tighter sense of community in the original size, and it's with the expansion. I think there's.
I think the answer there is, whenever you touch your community in terms of game design, they are gonna complain about it because that's also what happened in MMORPG scene when World of Warcraft went from 40 people raids to 25 people raids because people had to break their guilds. They had to lose their friends because Blizzard changed it. And when we changed our battle group system, we encountered the same problem. We touched something that they had built for themselves and had learned, and that is always a kind of messy thing to do.
Thank you.
Hi, just a simple question. How is your target audience segmented when it comes to gender and age?
Mostly men.
Do you
a
have
little
a
bit old.
A percentage?
I don't remember exactly, but I would say 25-75 maybe. 75% male, roughly.
Yeah. And the age?
In terms of age, I would say they're adults, so they're 18 and upwards. But then again, that's because we primarily are on iPhone, and that's the iPhone demographic.
Thank you.
Hi, I had a question. You touched on it earlier about new players and lobby zones and that kind of thing, which is kind of, a problem you're going to find with MMOs in general. And in location-based gaming, you showed the map of like the United States covered in green and that kind of thing. Do you find it's harder to get new players into Shadow Cities now that it has such a strong community and relatively stronger players, that it can be almost intimidating for a new player to step in and constantly get killed or struck down? And are you doing anything to try and address that?
The question was, do we have trouble getting new players engaged with Shadow Cities now that the community is on level 18? I guess that is something that happens with all games, that the people who come into the game very early are going to feel like they are the original players and they are going to be a part of the maturing community. I think that is something that happens to every MMORPG. And yes, it also happens in Shadow Cities. But then again, that's been the norm in Shadow Cities because people level to the maximum level in, well, a month maybe. So I think for the most of Shadow Cities' lifetime, that has been the case. And of course, I think it's the case in say, World of Warcraft as well.
Okay. Thank you.
I think we have the two last questions. Yeah.
Actually, my question was very similar to his. I mean, I've thought about LBS for a lot, and my question was very similar in the sense that how do you deal with a case where a new user joins and say, like, I play from home, and all my neighbors are, like, really mean, and they won't let me do anything, but because I'm stuck to LBS, I can't actually change to, like, another place. I need to physically move in order to start over. Is that what's the... Oh, sorry.
Precisely. The question is what we would do when you're surrounded by enemies and you start from level 1 and they keep beating your ass. And that is actually a big challenge. In Shadow Cities, you're protected until you reach level 6 or 7, so no one can attack you unless you hit them first. On longer term, we believe that in that point the player has learned to move in the world as well, so they can travel to other people's beacons and they can find some quieter spots.
So their base can actually not be their home.
Come again?
Their foundation base can be not where they actually are.
Yeah.
They can move completely away. And more or less, they could be playing the game not location based.
Yes, they can move virtually in the game.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. The last question.
Yeah. Hi. My company, we build sports games. You talked about like different genres like zombies, mafias, and stuff like that. Do you see like location-based systems being able to implement sports games in that genre? That's, I guess, number one question. Number two, I guess it's part of that same question is that where do you see kind of location-based like technology going forward, and how is that going to enhance different genres and development-wise?
The question was about sports games and location-based games, and also the location-based gaming technologies. Regarding sport games, I haven't really thought about that, but I would imagine that if you had a game in the stadium where everyone in the stadium could participate in whatever betting for the end result of the match, that's my first idea, and I think that might be sellable.
Okay.
The future of location-based gaming technology, as a company, we are only interested in kind of mass market technologies like iPhone and Android and that kind of stuff. And I'm not sure if there are going to be big changes in the near future. I don't think there are.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. And please remember to fill your feedback forms and also check your spam filters for the evaluation forms because apparently they get stuck. And if you're interested in this stuff, please get the book Pervasive Games from this address. Thank you.